Okay, so this is going to be about the directions of components of a vector. So you've got this vector in this example, and let's say this vector starts at origin and is of some length, and it has an arrow here, and we need to figure out what are the components directions, what are the x and y components directions of this vector. So this video is going to be about this physical intuition that you can develop about the components. Okay, so think about components as shadows. Okay, just keep that in mind. Shadows. That's a hopeless S, but components as shadows. Okay, so shadows on what and on where? Okay, so let's imagine that you get to have a torch, okay, and you shine light on this arrow, and this arrow in our imagination is actually a physical thing. So that is an arrow, and then it has some arrowhead like that. Okay, let me make this yellow. All right, that's the arrow. So if you shine light on it, it's gonna have shadow on the x-axis like this. Okay, so because it has the shadow on the x-axis, that is its x component, that is its shadow's length, and as you can see clearly that the shadow is pointing in the plus x direction. Now instead of this torch being there, if you have this torch here and then you're shining light on it, then the shadow of this arrow on the y-axis will be like this, right? And that is why this y component will be positive, because it is pointing to the plus y direction. So we have got this case where both the components are positive and positive. Okay, now let's look at this vector here. Okay, let's call this vector B. Now again we do the same thing. We take this torch and imagine this vector actually is made up of this stick. At the end of this stick you've got this arrow. Okay, and you shine this light on this vector so that the shadow is casted on the y-axis like this, and because it's casted on the y-axis, this is the y component, and it is pointing, the shadow is pointing in the plus y direction. That is why it's going to be positive. If you shine the light here, let's say on the arrow like this, then the shadow will be on the x-axis, and the shadow's arrow head will be pointing in the minus x direction, so its x component will be negative. Okay, let's look at this example. Let's do this little tricky one. Let me have this arrow like this. This is our vector. Let's call this vector C. Now this vector, well, before I explain that, let me just say one thing. I hope you observed that I didn't talk about where this arrow is, like on what quadrant this arrow is, or where this vector is directed at. The directions of the components I merely got by thinking about the shadows of this arrow on the y-axis and on the x-axis. Similarly I did with this one, and depending upon where the shadows were pointing at, I got the component signs. So if this is the vector, then this should not depend, the signs of the components of this vector should not depend on where this vector is. If it is half of it is in first quadrant and half of it is second quadrant, and so on and so forth, those things should not depend, those things should not determine the signs of the components. Okay, and the way you understand is this: you can always shift your coordinate system wherever you like. Okay, so I can keep it here, I can keep it here, I can keep it wherever we want, right? So if I keep it here, let's say I can keep it here, right? Wherever you want. Let me keep, originally it was here, and now let me have this here. Okay, now if you shine light, we do the same thing. Let me extend this y-axis and let me extend this x-axis, and actually let me just move everything to the right a little bit. Okay, so we again do the same thing. We shine the light on this arrow, okay, and the shadow is gonna be like this. Okay, and that is the y-axis, and the shadow is pointing in the minus y direction, so that means that its y component is negative. Now let me shine light on this vector so that the shadow is on the x-axis. That means I need my torch here. That means this will be the shadow on the x-axis, and because the shadow is pointing in the minus x direction, it's going to be negative.